Welcome to the Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast.
Hello and welcome to this week's podcast. I'm Thomas Hubert, news correspondent with the Irish Farmers Journal. Coming up on the show this week.
6,000 workers we needed in the dairy industry. Horticulture this year we need between 1,800 and 2,000 workers. That's actually excluding the sports turf industry, which also faces shortages. The meat factories require up to 2,000 workers as well. So to not allow asylum seekers, who by the way get €21 a week, just over €21 a week, to sit idle in a provision centre, who are eager to work, and not allowing them to work in areas where we badly need them to, doesn't really make sense.
Legislation is on the way to allow asylum seekers to work in Ireland. Will they take up a job on your farm? And the opinion of Kerry Group's new Chief Executive Eamon Scanlon on how milk processors should prepare for the next phase of dairy expansion.
You would have to expect that some joined up thinking would be the best way to try and go at it, because I just don't see, from my perspective, how an adequate return is going to be gained from the level of assets that are going to have to be put in the ground if we spread those assets all over the country.
But first, let's hear from the ring side. A number of marts, especially in the West, have introduced new safety measures and restricted access to their lairage after a serious accident in Mohill a few weeks ago. This is linked to the cost of their insurance, which has been spiralling in recent years. Emer McGuinness, the manager of Donegal Mart, told the Finance Committee of the Oireachtas on Thursday that some marts were facing closure as they're caught between rising insurance premiums and the cost of safety works.
In Donegal town, the Mart is an old building. We're 50 years last year in operation, and we need to put in a walkway which would go up across the yard, and that's extreme expense, money that we just don't have. My job every year is to try and make the Mart break even, and to get money like that, it's impossible at the minute, because a lot of changes, as when you have a building 50 years old, you spend a lot of money all the time. And one thing I'd also like to point out, there's a lot of marts there that have had huge hikes and they have had no claims. So that's very, very unfair. And I'd like to know the reasoning behind that. As I said, I'm with Associated Livestock Marts, Donegal Marts Association. We're very fearful for the future of the marts. And marts are needed. They're needed in every town and village. There was reasons why they were set up in the first place, for trading of livestock. It's also become a social thing for farmers. Farmers mightn't see anybody from one end of the week to the next, and they go to the Mart every week to discuss the price of cattle. But it's very, very important for communities and villages and towns. When the farmer comes to the town, he spends money. I'll tell you really what, if we make some changes, and I do understand we have to make changes, whether it's a viewing period for cattle or whatever we have to do, we have to come to some agreement. But insurance companies can't be saying they're going to wait 5 years for these changes to be made. They have to bring the premiums back down now.
So what do insurers reply to this? FBD is more or less the only company accepting to give the average mart a quote these days. Its Chief Commercial Officer, John Cahallan, also addressed the committee.
There are 77 marts in Ireland. We insure 52 of them, so we have a good handle on them. The reality at the moment is that for every euro we underwrite in the marts, it's costing us €1.30. We're losing money in marts because the cost of claims and the frequency of claims have gone up. Now, the marts are fundamentally important to us as a farm insurer. This is where our customers trade. So in FBD, we want to work with our customers, with the mart owners, to put in good risk management practices. And in fact, we have, working with ICOS, the Irish Cooperative Organisation Society, the mart owners and the HSA have put in a voluntary code of practice to try and improve the work practices.
And the Minister of State in charge of insurance, Michael Darcy, also spoke on the issue. He said that the government has plans to bring down the cost of claims, but this will take time. For more on this issue, you can read my coverage in this week's Irish Farmers Journal.
You're listening to the Irish Farmers Journal podcast.
More money matters, but inside the farm gate this time. The government has invited fresh opinions on the taxation of farmers, and the IFA has just put forward its submission. Hannah Quinn Mulligan asked the association's farm business chairman, Martin Stapleton, what tax rules could be adapted to help with income volatility and lift obstacles faced by young and female farmers.
So, Martin Stapleton, we're in the IFA just after your council meeting where your agri-taxation submission has been approved by the council. Can you go through some of the main points in the submission for listeners?
First of all, on the implementation of the agri-tax review, we highlighted a number of issues that were outstanding. The stamp duty relief for young farmers, the stamp duty relief for farmers who are consolidating, and the tax treatment of payments received for the use of forestry land by a third party. Interestingly, I suppose one that we were really focusing on, and one that will be a bit of change for IFA, was that we are proposing that agricultural relief will be restricted to focus primarily on genuine family farms. I think there's a concern among too many people that this tax is open to, or this tax relief is open to abuse at the minute.
What's been mentioned is that we've had a very good year for dairy prices, say last year, and now this year dairy prices, the milk price has gone down. Is there anything around that farmers would be looking at?
Yeah, and we have a considerable amount of work done to ease the burden caused by volatility and the amount of tax that farmers have to pay. ICAS put forward for the last few years, and indeed IFA did before that, put forward a deposit scheme which would allow farmers to put away money in a good year. This year we've agreed with ICAS that measure would be adapted so that not only dairy farmers could put money into their co-ops, a maximum of 5% of their gross receipts, but also that all farmers, no matter which sector, no matter which scale, would be able to put 5% of their gross receipts aside, whether in a co-op or in a specially designated bank account. That money would have to be drawn up within 5 years and would be available to the farmers to draw down in a difficult year, in a year of low prices or of bad weather, and pay the tax on it on the year in which it was drawn down.
I mean, there are going to be people out there who's saying that there might be two taxation systems now for farmers and non-farmers, and maybe farmers are getting preferential treatment. What would you say to that?
No, I don't think so, and I think that it's very, very important to remember that volatility is not something that is caused by farmers. It's caused by the system that's put in place, where world market prices are driven by sentiment, and our output prices can change from year to year by as much as 100%. That's really, really difficult to cope with in the context of a sole trader making his living and the effect that can have on the amount of income tax that they have to pay. I often give the example of two farmers, one who makes, for example, 35,000 on 2 consecutive years, and compare him to a farmer who might make a profit of 70,000 in 1 year and nothing the year after. And that farmer who might make the 70,000 in the 1 year could end up paying as much as €5,000 in tax extra. So this is not a measure that means that farmers would have to pay less tax. It's a measure to ensure that they don't have to pay extra tax and to ensure farmers are treated fairly by the tax system.
Another issue that's maybe come up in the agri-taxation review and that's been mentioned in your submission as well is the number of female farmers. And I think in the official review it said to look at unintended barriers for female farmers. And your own organisation, there's been an increase in the number of female county chairs as well. I mean, what's your kind of thoughts around that?
I mean, it's obvious that the more women we have involved in farming, the better it is for everybody. For farming as a whole, like every other sector of our economy, it needs female participation. It needs a gender balance, I think, is the way to put it. Historically, farming has been male dominated, and what we're saying here is it's more than just a measure to incentivise women to in practice. That's what it will do. But it is saying that where two partners in a marriage or in a family are working together, that of course the allowances that are available to other people should be available as well to farmers. So in the context of our proposal, it is that where a farmer is being assisted by his or her spouse, that spouse, and being paid by his or her spouse and being paid by the farmer on a PAYE basis, that spouse should be eligible to the PAYE allowance, which they're not at the minute. But believe it or not, it's incredible to believe that.
This was IFA Farm Business Chairman Martin Stapleton talking to Hannah Quinn Mulligan. Stay tuned. After this break, we're meeting the new boss of Kerry Group.
Bigger cap payments for smaller farmers on the way. As Commissioner Hogan gets ready to publish radical cap proposals tomorrow, the Irish Farmers Journal reports from Brussels to bring you the key changes that are likely to be announced, including the front-loading of basic payments, a special fund for young farmers, a new environmental scheme, a coupled payments option and a €60,000 cap on payments. For unrivaled insights and commentary on the new cap, you cannot afford to miss this week's Irish Farmers Journal, on sale now.
At the launch of the Irish Farmers Journal Agribusiness Report last week, Owen Lowry had a public interview with Kerry Group's Chief Executive Edmund Scanlon. They talked about consumer trends, Kerry's strategy and China, and you can listen to the whole discussion at farmersjournal.ie. Then Owen asked him about issues closer to farmers' hearts.
Where do you see the medium long-term price of milk? We've seen an awful lot of volatility over the last number of years, but I suppose let's call a spade a spade. Where, you know, the price of milk, I suppose, it has ranged from your high 30s to your low 20s in the past 2-3 years. You know, that's hugely volatile. Where do you see the long-term settlement of that price?
I wish we designed an app for that one. You know? That would be a great opportunity for somebody to develop an app to predict the milk price. But look, with that sort of volatility, there's no winners. There's absolutely no winners in that sort of volatility. And I think a big focus for us in the last couple of years is to come up with strategic and tactical solutions that we can do our absolute utmost to minimise that level of volatility. We'll be coming out in the next few weeks with a scheme with our farmers to try and introduce more forward-looking type price mechanisms that will try and help on that volatility. Look, the long-term demand for dairy, I feel, is there. I mean, if you just very much look at the big picture, and I know our farmers get frustrated by this from time to time when they hear this, but look, with 10 billion people on the planet by 2050, by the huge increase, I mean 2.7 billion people added to the middle class demographic between now and 2030, and 90% of that growth is going to come from developing markets, mainly in Asia and Africa. These are dairy poor countries. So when you look at the big picture, you have to say that that dairy demand will be there in the medium to long term. Now, after that, it's down to supply and demand. The demand is there, so we know the demand is there. What's going to happen to supply? And it's that balance that's going to drive the price of milk. It's not Kerry or the other Irish processors that are going to, I suppose, set the price of milk. It's going to be that balance between the demand and supply. And,
as the shackles of quota come off and we see expansion, and we've seen the 2 billion extra litres come in, and a further expansion coming down the line, it seems, driven by on-farm profitability and efficiencies. Is Ireland right to go for that scale and to go after that market and expand?
I think the approach has to be balanced. I mean, look, the reality is the basket of our products that we're manufactured here in Ireland are very much commodity based. The vast majority of our products are very commodity driven. And with the level of investment that's going to be required to process the expected growth in the milk pool over the next 5-10 years, it's going to be very difficult to make that work from a return on investment standpoint. So, look, from a Kerry perspective, I suppose our milk pool won't really grow to the same level. I mean, we're only seeing maybe from now on 1 to 2% increase on milk volumes. But I think as a country, we really have to think about how we put assets on the ground in the next phase. You would have to expect that some joined up thinking would be the best way to try and go at it, because I just don't see, from my perspective, how an adequate return is going to be gained from the level of assets that are going to have to be put in the ground if we spread those assets all over the country. I just see it's going to be very difficult to get an adequate return.
the Irish Farmers Journal weekly podcast.
Finally, what if labour shortages on your farms could be filled by asylum seekers? A recent court decision means they will soon have the right to work, and Hannah Quinn Mulligan asked Irish Country Living's career specialist, Anthony Jordan, for more details.
Yeah, so I suppose before February, asylum seekers weren't allowed to work in Ireland. A Supreme Court measure came in, or Supreme Court ruling rather, came in February, which allowed, or which showed that asylum seekers, or banning asylum seekers from working in Ireland's labour market, was unconstitutional. So in June, Ireland will be opting into an EU directive, which will be looking into asylum seekers gaining employment permits, which will hopefully, we imagine, will allow them to work in the agriculture and horticulture sectors, which at the moment are facing quite stark labour shortages.
I think the FRS have said that there has been a 20% increase almost year in year in the need for dairy workers, say, in particular, and we know that area is expanding. So, like you said, so potentially this could help the agriculture sector. Is that what we think? And maybe all sectors? Is that what we're hoping for? Do we have our fingers crossed that that's going to be the case?
Yeah, well, I suppose at the moment, after the Supreme Court ruling, an interim measure was put in place, and that interim measure had quite difficult stipulations if asylum seekers wanted to obtain an employer's permit. And one of the many stipulations was that they couldn't work as agricultural workers, more or less in any form, as farm workers or in the horticultural industry. At the moment, we know that Teagasc's report last June outlined that 6,000 workers were needed in the dairy industry. Horticulture this year will need between 1,800 and 2,000 workers. That's actually excluding the sports turf industry, which also faces shortages. The meat factories require up to 2,000 workers as well. So to not allow asylum seekers, who, by the way, get €21 a week, just over €21 a week, to sit idle in a provision centre, who are eager to work, and to the idea of not allowing them to work in areas where we badly need them to, really is just not really, it doesn't really make sense.
And like I said, so at the minute they're sitting in these provision centres, but it might sound like a stupid question, but do they want to work? Are they interested in working in areas like agriculture?
Yeah, well, I spoke with numerous asylum groups, and one of the things that I asked them was, do they want to work? The question is unanimously yes, they want to work, because I mean, you can imagine if you're sitting in an asylum centre from one end of the day to the other, you know it is human nature that you will get completely bored, and your form will obviously drop. After speaking with numerous asylum organisations, I asked, would people be interested in speaking with me? The response was incredible. The amount of asylum seekers who grew up in a farming background, who are interested in entering the agricultural sector in Ireland, was phenomenal. So there's definitely is a will out there for individuals, asylum seekers, to work. And we need them to work. We need people to go into these sectors to fill the labour gaps and labour shortages that we see in the industry at the moment, and will continue. Let's be under no illusions here. These shortages are going to continue for the next few years. The economy is getting better, and people, a lot more people don't want to be taking these sort of.
A lot of Irish people don't
want to be taking these jobs. So I mean, it's important that we source the labour from somewhere. We see that 800 work permits have been granted by the Department of Business and Enterprise and Innovation in the last few weeks. So that just shows the need for this labour. So the work, we need help from somewhere, and this could be a potential solution.
That's it from us this week. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast in the tractor, catching the best of the good weather, or at home enjoying a well-deserved break. The sound engineer this week was Ferdia Mooney, and I'm Thomas Hubert. Talk to you next week.
The Irish Farmers Journal podcast, online at farmersjournal.ie and on iTunes every Thursday.